All right. Shalom, shalom. First and foremost, I would like to give all praise and glory to YAHAWAH, BAHASHAM, YAHAWASHI, BAHASHAM, Makakwadash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone who taught us this truth. And salutations to the hopeful elect that's around the four corners of the globe. And the elect begins with the 144,000. Yahweh, who the world ignorantly calls God and Jehovah. BAHASHAM is in the name. YAHAWASHI, who the world ignorantly calls Jesus Christ. The Rakakwadash shares the Holy Spirit. I'm the brother I will with the gym at Chicago, camp out here in Chicago. Come back at you, brothers and sisters of the household of faith of the hopeful right select with another lesson. And Lord, and I hope this lesson be edifying through the spirit and power of Yahweh Bashem Shai. Once again, I hope this lesson is edifying. And as you know, as you can see the title, I was just scrolling through my timeline or whatnot, going through these different social media platforms, whether it be TikTok, Instagram, or Facebook or whatnot, seeing what type of news, what was going on around the world, so I can make a lesson. And I had ultimately stumbled upon these few jakes that was ultimately talking about or complaining, and that it was ultimately bitter to them how they was ultimately saying, what was God doing slavery, man? Not understanding that, we were ultimately put into slavery because of our disobedience, man. Because we transgressed the ways of Yahweh BaHaShem Yahweh Shai, man. Because what a lot of our people don't have the understanding, man. They can't ultimately figure out why they're in this predicament, man. It's because we ultimately transgress the ways of Yahweh BaHaShem Yahweh Shai. Therefore, he put the enemies over us, man. You have a lot of jakes that's ultimately bitter about this situation, not knowing that ultimately it was Yahweh BaHaShem Yahweh Shai that orchestrated our captivity, man. Because once again, like I said, hey, we have sinned against Yahweh BaHaShem Yahweh Shai. But just to grab a few precepts, I'm gonna start off right here. This is the book of Baruch, 4 and verse 6. And it reads, you were sold to the nations, not for your destruction, but because ye moved Yahweh to wrath, ye were delivered unto the enemies. Right? We moved Yahweh to wrath, man. Well, how did we do that, man? By transgressing his ways, man, by serving different gods. And you read from the books of Genesis all down, all the way to Revelations, even the Apocrypha. You read, Baruch as I'm reading, you read first and second Esdras, man. You read these different books throughout the scriptures. So what is our people ultimately known for? Hey, go back to the Exodus, man. Go back to the account of the Exodus. Well, ultimately, our people was delivered from ancient Egypt. Yahweh used Moses to deliver the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt. What did our people end up doing in the wilderness, man? They ultimately end up building a golden calf while Moses was away talking to Yahweh, man. So this is why the Lord put the enemies over us, man. That's why we're in this lower state, man. That's why we're under the curses, man. So what was God doing slavery? His true name is Yahweh. Because ultimately we transgress, man. So ultimately what? The Lord has ultimately what? Constructed this captivity to ultimately to be a punishment for us, for our people, man. So I'm going to read this again. This is the book of Baruch 4 and 6. You were sold to the nations, not for your destruction, but because ye moved Yahweh to wrath, ye were delivered unto your enemies, right? So this captivity was used for our punishment, man, but not to utterly destroy us, man, because, well, we know that Yahweh BaHaShem Yahweh Shai has a remnant that he saved unto himself, man, the elect. And it reads, verse 7, it says, for ye provoked him that made you by sacrificing unto devils and not to Yahweh, right? Sacrificing unto devils, as I mentioned before. Hey, the golden calf coming out of the land of Egypt, man. Hey, the different things, you read the book of Judges, man. What's that? The book of Judges, how ultimately our people was going in and out of captivity, man. And the Lord will raise up a judge to deliver us out that said captivity is because our people was known what serving different gods and transgressing the ways of Yahweh BaHaShem Yahweh Shai. And this is not our first captivity that we're in, man. Hey, you look at ancient Egypt, man. You look at Babylon. You look at Assyria. You look at the Persian Medes. You look at Greece. You look at Rome, and the second leg of the Roman Empire being America, man. Hey, this is nothing new for our people. Our people is known of ultimately what? Transgressing the ways of Yahweh BaHaShem Yahweh Shai. And what? The Lord will set up what? The enemies over us, man. And ultimately, it was the Lord that set up this, man. The Lord that ultimately orchestrated, our captivities, man. But verse 8, it says, ye have forgotten the everlasting power that brought you up, and ye have grieved Jerusalem that nourished you. And exactly right. We have forgotten the everlasting power, which is Yahweh BaHaShem Yahweh Shai, man, serving other gods, man. And our people is known of doing this. So ultimately, what? Yahweh BaHaShem Yahweh Shai set up the enemy over us, man. Hey, this is nothing new, man. Like I mentioned before. Hey, this is not our first captivity. This is not Israel first, first captivity, man. We have been ultimately known of serving these different gods. Ultimately what? The Lord will put the enemies over us, man. And the Lord will ultimately what? As we're unto this day, man, we're under the curses, man. As Baruch 3 and 8 says, we are yet this day in our captivity, man. But this is the book of Lamentations 2 In verse 17, the Lord Yahawah have done that which he have devised. He hath fulfilled his word that he had commanded in the days of old. He hath thrown down and have not pitied, and he have caused thy enemy to rejoice over thee. He have set up the horn of thy adversaries, right? That horn is a representation of, the power, man. Because ultimately, what YAHAWASHI has given our enemies the power to ultimately to reign over us and to devour us, because what we have transgressed against YAHAWASHI, man. To answer that question, man, if I can edit this video, I'm gonna put it, in the beginning of this lesson, how ultimately these different Jakes are saying, what was God doing slavery? And his true name is Yahawah. And ultimately what? Yahawah was ultimately what? Orchestrating our captivity to ultimately what? To be used as a punishment against us for our iniquities and for our wicked ways, man. To correct us, man. And it reads, verse 18, it says, their heart cry unto the Lord, O wall of the daughter of Zion, let tears run down like a river day and night. Give thyself no rest. Let not the apple of thine eye cease. But that was pretty much the point. The Lord ultimately what? Raised up our enemies to come up against us, man. And as you're reading the curses, let's actually grab that in Deuteronomy. Because ultimately it says, let me actually grab this real quick. Because it talks about, if we didn't hearken diligently into the ways of Yahweh BAHASHAM YAHAWASHI, that all these curses will come upon thee and overtake us, man. Let's actually start. I'm going to jump all the way around in this Deuteronomy, but this is the book of Deuteronomy 28 and verse 1. And it shall come to pass, if thou shalt not hearken, Salaki, I'm going to start over. Deuteronomy 28 and verse 1. And it shall come to pass, if thou shalt hearken diligently unto the voice of the Lord thy power, to observe and to do all his commandments, which I command thee this day, that the Lord Yahawah thy power will set thee on high above all nations of the earth, right? So we ultimately what? Hearken diligently into YAHAWASHI YAHAWASHI, man. We will be blessed in all our doings, man. We will be the head and not the tail. We will be blessed in the land. We will be blessed, in all our doings, man. But let's jump down to verse 15. And this is the state of our people today, man, because we have transgressed the ways of YAHAWASHI YAHAWASHI, man. And now this is what our people don't understand, man. Our people always point the fingers at the Most High of what the Most High is not doing. But it was always us that was transgressing against the ways of YAHAWASHI YAHAWASHI, man. Forgetting YAHAWASHI YAHAWASHI, turning our back on the YAHAWASHI YAHAWASHI, man. But this is the book of Deuteronomy 28 and verse 15, and we're going to jump right all around in this chapter. Deuteronomy 28 and verse 15, it says, and it reads, but it shall come to pass, if thou wilt not hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy power, to observe, to do all his commandments and his statutes that I command thee this day, that all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee. Right. So ultimately what? And this is the state of our people today. All the curses of Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter, you read verses 15 all the way down to 68. I'm going to get a few of these curses. Ultimately, we didn't hearken unto YAHAWASHI YAHAWASHI that way. We will be cursed, man. You look at the state of our people today, man. Our people was constantly being oppressed. Our people was at the low of the low, and it's a reason for that, because of our iniquity, because of our transgressions, man. So let's get a few of these curses. Verse 16, it says, cursed shalt thou be in the city, and cursed shalt thou be in the field. Right, this is the Most High Yahawah putting the curses upon our people for our disobedience, man. Read that again. Verse 16, it says, cursed shalt thou be in the city, and cursed shalt thou be in the field, right? So you look at these different major cities, right? You look at these different ghettos that Jake resides in, whether it be a so-called Negro, Latino, Native American, or a speckled bird. Hey, it's a lot of abandoned buildings, ultimately what? Run down houses, overgrown yards, trash everywhere, man. You have a lot of homelessness, a lot of violence within these different cities. It says what? Cursed shalt thou be in the city, and cursed shalt thou be in the field, right? Everywhere in the world, man, ultimately what? Our people is experiencing these said curses, man. So let's get another one. This is the book of Deuteronomy 28. And let's see. Verse 30, Deuteronomy 20 and verse 30, thou shalt betroth a wife, and another man shall lie with her. Thou shalt build an house, and thou shalt not dwell therein. Thou shalt plant a vineyard, and shalt not gather the grapes thereof. And right, what does that sound like? Hey, that happened during hardcore slavery, man. You'll have Jake that had a wife, and ultimately what? The slave master will take her and ultimately grape her, man. You know, and this is, you know, the curses that you can read about in Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter. And this was all orchestrated by Yahweh, BAHASHAM, YAHAWASHI, man. You know, like I said, our people love to blame, you know, Yahweh, BAHASHAM, YAHAWASHI, you know, for being, you know, in this low condition. But it was ultimately us, man. But let's actually grab that in Ezekiel real quick. Because like I said, our people love to point the finger, you know, at the Most High, but it was always us that went off, man. Let me see. Let me come back to that Deuteronomy. Let me see. I had a few scriptures written down. It's the book of Ezekiel, 18 and verse 25. And jump back to that Deuteronomy. Ezekiel 18 and 25, and it reads, "Yet ye say, the way of the Lord is not equal. Hear now, O house of Israel, is not my way equal? Are not your ways unequal?" And right, and then Yahweh Shemal Shai has always dealt fairly with us, man. But it was always us, man. You know, the children of Israel, so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, always were always unequal, man. Because what, we will serve these different gods. You know, we will ultimately, you know, commit all type of abominations in the land, man. And it was always us, man. But we, you know, how Jake do it today, man, Jake has always been doing. They always put the fingers back at Yahweh, BAHASHAM, YAHAWASHI while they're in this low condition, man. But as I read in that Deuteronomy 28 and verse 15, all these curses shall come upon us because of what? Of our disobedience. We didn't obey the ways of Yahweh, BAHASHAM, YAHAWASHI. So ultimately what? The Lord ultimately set up the enemies over us to devour us, man. And this is nothing new, man. You know, our people is known to going the fuck off, you know, pointing the finger back at the Most High, you know, Yahweh, BAHASHAM, YAHAWASHI, and our people will constantly do the same thing. The Lord will raise up a judge to deliver us. You know, we will go back into captivity. The Lord ultimately will deliver us, and we will do the same thing all over again, man. You know, and this is nothing new, man. You know, but the only difference in this captivity, yeah, we have forgotten who we were, man. You know, and ultimately what, Jake, you know, it's the worst that they have ever been, man. You know, but ultimately we were the problem, man. You know, so ultimately to answer, you know, these few Jake's question, man, what was God doing slavery? Real name is Yahweh, true name is Yahweh. The Lord ultimately orchestrated it, man. But back in this Deuteronomy, this is the book of Deuteronomy 28 and verse 43. I'm gonna read verse 37. Deuteronomy 28 and 37, just to read a few of these curses. "And thou shalt become an astonishment, a proverb, and a byword among all nations, whither the Lord shall lead thee." Right. You know, hey, what is a proverb and a byword? Nigger, spick, savage. You know, these are different proverbs and bywords that ultimately what? That we were given by our enemies. You know, mainly Esau, Edom. Let's grab another one. Jump down to verse 41. "Thou shalt begat sons and daughters, but thou shalt not enjoy them, for they shall go into captivity." Right. Because ultimately what, you know, your sons and daughters will be, you know, separated. The family will be separated. You know, the son will be, you know, for an example, will be sent to the Mississippi plantation. The daughter would be sent to the Alabama plantation. What, the families will be split up, man. Sons and daughters will be, you know, separated and sent to different plantations, man. You know, ultimately sold out to different slave owners, man. And this is the curses that Yahweh Shemal Shai put upon our people, man. You know, and I'm gonna keep saying it. Hey, a lot of these jakes don't understand, you know, ultimately what we're suffering, you know, for our sins, man, for our iniquity, man. You know, but ultimately what, in the end, Yahweh Shemal Shai will pay back those that put their hands on us, man. But Jake don't understand these, you know, said things that I'm bringing out, man, that we always bring out, man, starting with the elders and apostles on down. But let's actually jump up. This is the book of Deuteronomy 28 and verse 64. And it reads, "And the Lord Yahweh shall scatter thee among all people from one end of the earth even unto the other, and there thou shalt serve other gods which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, even wood and stone." Right, during the transatlantic slave trade, we was sent through, you know, different parts of the world, man. You know, a lot of our people were sent to Europe. A lot of our people were sent to Spain. You know, South America, here in America, Canada. Our people was ultimately what, dispersed everywhere, man, amongst these other nations, man. And it says what, thou shalt serve. It says, "And thou shalt serve other gods which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, even wood and stone." Right. A lot of our people is into Christianity. A lot of our people are Muslims, man. You know, serving that fat ass rock over there in Mecca, man. You know, so ultimately what? You know, our people serving these different gods just like they did back then, man. And this is why, we're in this predicament, man. Verse 65, it says, and among these nations shalt thou find no ease, neither shall the sole of thy foot have rest, but the Lord shall give thee there a trembling heart. Goes into the word la, which is the mind, talking about the heart, which goes back to the mind, a trembling heart and a failing of eyes and sorrow of mind. And thy life shall hang in doubt before thee, and thou shalt fear day and night, and shall have none assurance of thy life. Because every time a Jake steps out the door, hey, we have that thought in the back of our mind. I don't know if I'm gonna make it back home tonight, man. I don't know if I'm gonna make it back home in a few hours, man. This is what the average Jake has to worry about on a day-to-day basis, man. Is I'm finna get shot by a police officer. Is I'm finna be killed by my oppressor. And these are the said curses that YAHAWASHI put on us, man. And the Lord was watching this whole time, man. It's to answer these Jake's question. What was Yahweh, doing slavery? He was ultimately orchestrating, man, putting the foot up our ass for our disobedience, man. And this is something Jake don't understand. Like a father will ultimately discipline his child, man. This is what the Lord is doing to us, man. Verse 68, I'm going to jump down to verse 68, Deuteronomy 28 and 68, and this is a big one. And the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships. And talking about this Egypt, this is a spiritual Egypt, man. Talking about America, you read Revelations, the 11th chapter, it says what? Their dead bodies shall lie in the street of the great city, which is spiritually called what? Sodom and Egypt, man. You look on the back of the dollar bill, what is it? It's a pyramid, man. So this place, America, is spiritual Egypt, man. And the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt, right? That Egypt is talking about America, again with ships, by the way whereof I spake unto thee. Thou shalt see it no more again, right? What will we go see no more again? Our homeland, which is what? The land of Israel, man. And there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. Meaning what? No man shall redeem you. No man shall save you. Because the only person that's going to save us is Yahweh's son, YAHAWASHI, man, who's going to ultimately make his second return. Hey, we're ultimately, on the YAHAWASHI's return is imminent, man. He's going to deliver us from the hands of the enemies, man. But just to go back to that question, what was Yahweh doing slavery? Ultimately, what? Orchestrating our punishment, and ultimately what? Punishing us for our iniquity, man. But let's grab this in Deuteronomy. I had a few scriptures written down. This is the book of Deuteronomy 28 and verse 30, 32 and verse 30, Salakia. How should one chase 1,000 and two put 10,000 to flight, except their rock has sold them and their Lord Yahweh has shut them up? Right, because it was ultimately Yahweh BAHASHAM YAHAWASHI that gave us over to the hands of the enemies, man. Because of our disobedience. Because ultimately, you look back through history, our history, man. Hey, when we disobey Yahweh BAHASHAM YAHAWASHI, the Lord gave the power and ultimately uplifted these other nations to take us down, man. It wasn't because these nations were so mighty. The Lord used these said nations as a whooping stick to ultimately what? To put a foot in our ass for our disobedience, man. And who is the Lord's main whooping stick, man? Esau Edom, because it says in Psalm 17, deliver me from the hands of the wicked, which is thy sword, man. Loosely paraphrasing, man. So ultimately, what? Yahweh BAHASHAM YAHAWASHI was the one, that ultimately what put us in a lower state and ultimately put us into captivity, man. But let me see. That was pretty much all I had for the most part. But just to answer, these Jake's, questions, man. Hey, what was Yahweh doing slavery, man? Ultimately, what? Punishing us, man. Ultimately, what? Orchestrating our captivity and putting the foot up on our ass, man. Because ultimately, like I mentioned before, man, like a son, like a father would discipline his son. This is what Yahweh BAHASHAM YAHAWASHI is doing to us, man. But ultimately, what? Because of our disobedience. But just something quick I wanted to get into, man. Lord, I hope this lesson was edifying. I want to end up by giving all praise and glory to Yahweh BAHASHAM, YAHAWASHI, BAHASHAM HaKakwadash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of great millstone that taught us this truth, and salutations to the hopeful elect that's around the four corners of the globe. Lord willing, I hope this lesson was edifying. Until next time, Kwam Yasharallah, Shalom, and the Baba Ball. Until next time, Lord willing, Kwam Yasharallah, Shalom, and the Baba Ball.